Are we online? We are online, but for some reason, Jonathan disappeared. Oh, hello, Jonathan. It's so good to see you.
Back
You
again.
disappeared just for a second, and we just started the stream. Hello, my dear friends. Operator Starsky here, and today I am with Serhii Sternenko, my good friend from Germany, and Jonathan Fink, my good friend from Silicon Curtain, located in the beautiful United Kingdom. And today we're gonna talk about several updates from Ukraine, around Ukraine, related to Ukraine, and not only related to Ukraine. We started talking about the Unholy Church, and why we started talking about the Unholy Church, because of the Roman Pope, the Roman Pope Donald Trump. So guys, how are you? Let's start with Serhii. How are you doing?
Oh, great! Thank you, thank you. Well, I have seen today this picture of Donald Trump as a pope that the team of the White House has posted on an official channel, social media, and I thought, my gosh, have we expected something like that a couple of years ago? This is the new level of reality which we live in, and I remembered like it is like in the Alice in Wonderland, curious and curious, as she said, using this strange form of the adjective. And or as a Soviet Jewish poet Igor Guberman said in his amazing short verse, when a Jew will be allowed to see the God, what will he say after the first greeting? He will say, "Oh yes, I lived in a very interesting time, but that is not what I asked about." And that is where we all live now. Very interesting time, curious and curiouser, but hell, that is not what we have asked about.
I completely agree with you. Jonathan, how are you, my friend?
I am good. It's good to see you looking so well and, bouncy. I don't know. I couldn't find the right word for it. But yes, you look full of energy today, which is absolutely brilliant. And I've been on a big cycle ride, so I feel quite energized as well. I described what's going on. I mean, I referred to Trump's regime and some of the antics he gets up to, and I introduced an episode, and I think I caused one of my viewers to spit out his coffee. I described it as a dark Narnia, which seemed kind of fitting.
I like it. I absolutely like it. My dear friends in the chat, it's so good to see you too, by the way. And we already have our courageous team of moderators, Ali, Newman, and Katie. Thank you so much for providing security guarantees for our chat. This is something we all need today. And also, just to remind you, we keep running our fundraiser for the drones that save lives of soldiers of the 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard Rubizh, my brigade, the glorious HOSTOMEL Brigade. You can see all the necessary links in the chat. And by the way, Serhii, can we already talk about how much we gathered as of today?
Yes, absolutely. And once again, Starsky, thank you so much that you support your brigade, your friends, your comrades, and thank you for running this amazing weekly live broadcasting to support this donation campaign. We have raised already over 32,000 euro via PayPal. You can find the link in the description of this video, and we have raised over 10,000 euro on donations which came through bank transactions. And the bank transactions, you can find them also in the description of this video on YouTube. And if we look, if you are enjoying this broadcasting via Twitter, where you can see it on my Somleni channel, there will be right now a commentary from the European Resilience Initiative Center mentioning both donation options, the PayPal and the bank. If you donate via bank, it will be cheaper for everyone because there is no transaction fee. If you donate via PayPal, there will be a tiny little transaction fee attached, but it's not that huge that you should avoid it. So answering your question, Starsky, over 40,000 euro has been donated already. which makes guys on the front happy. And you can see behind me the flag of the Rubizh Brigade, which they have donated me or presented me, so to say, after our last donation campaign, as we were supplying them already with drones. And that is why they came to us and say, guys, your drones are so amazing. We want more and more and more of them, because they will make it possible for us to fulfill our missions, to save lives of our soldiers and to save life of civilians, which is of course the primary mission of any unit, to save lives of the compatriots.
Thank you so much. Dear friends, thank you so much for supporting my brigade. This is my first big fundraiser that I take part in, and it's very, very important to me because these guys are my guys. I know the commander. He was my first company commander back in the days when I just joined as a private in the infantry company. He was my commander who trained me, and now he's a brigade commander. And to me, it's very, very important to support those guys, because despite I don't serve there anymore, but I will never be a different person again. My heart, my soul, my love belongs there to my brigade. So thank you so much for supporting my brigade, and big thanks to everyone who also watches us today. We have quite a few our old friends in the chat, and we have people watching us in Canada, we have people watching us in Ukraine. Добрий вечір вам також. And what else? So first of all, I would like to ask you about that Unholy Church, because, you know, we planned several different topics, but I really like to learn about this one, because generally speaking, you know, my stream's nothing official. We're just drinking coffee. By the way, I have this absolutely amazing cup that you can see with the Russian ship being screwed. What was the story? I think you talked to Jonathan about it.
Well, the Unholy Church gets a double meaning now, because the Russian Church, the Orthodox, how they call it, Orthodox Russian Church, is unholy thing per se. It was created by Joseph Stalin in 1943, because like the communists, the Bolsheviks, have destroyed the Russian Orthodox Church in 1918. It was banned. There was no patriarchy back then. And only during the World War II, Stalin has realized, oh wow, I need a religion, because the Nazis try to make it into a political tool, and they say, oh, we're like Christian friendly on the occupied territories, we reinstalled the church. So Stalin said, we need to have a church too, but it need to be fully intelligence service operated. So he has practically created the Orthodox Church in 1943, appointed the new patriarch, and there was the story how the first delegation of the Russian priests came to Stalin's office in 1943, and they were so afraid that they will be executed. So they came in plain clothes, not in religious clothes. And the guy who was about to be appointed as a patriarch, but he didn't know it yet, he started to bow in front of Stalin, saying, oh, glory to our great leader and general secretary of the party, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. So the Stalin, who was famous for his very dark humor, and it's easy to have dark humor when you can execute every person in the country, he turned to him and said, oh, wow, you are afraid of me, not afraid of him. So the test was passed. The guy was appointed to the patriarch, and the church was fully intelligence service operated since then. Was a tool of intelligence operations abroad and of denunciation and so. And now they have the Unholy Church in the middle of a building. They have built not far from Moscow, 60 kilometers westward, close to a town of Kubinka. They have built a huge military propaganda complex, many square miles, with tank testing ground, with some propaganda center for the youth, with exhibition of German tanks from World War II captured, and even with the small copy, like 1:4 size, of the Reichstag building burned down, which they ritually storm every May, celebrating the capture of Berlin, and ritually reinstall the red banner on it. So just think about it.
This is
And
this is so crazy when you think about. They reenact the assault on Reichstag every single year. Literally,
yeah, I think they would love to reinstall the Molotov-Ribbentrop or Stalin-Hitler pact, which they tried to do with Angela Merkel, like dividing Central Europe. They would love to do it, but as it hasn't gone as well as they thought. It went pretty well for them, but not as well as they thought. So they reinstalled the replay this storm of Reichstag. But coming back to the church, so they have installed there a huge cathedral, an Orthodox cathedral painted in khaki. So I think it's the only church in the world, or the only cathedral in the world, painted in khaki. Inside, it looks like a Warhammer 40k thing, with mosaics in dark red, like blood dropping from the walls, with a lot of weapons installed everywhere, with mosaics picturing Stalin, generals of the Soviet army, Vladimir Putin, his minister of defense, Shoigu, etc. It pictures in the church the propaganda pictures of capturing of Crimea, and to make it absolutely Kafka style, they have created the floor from the plates of German tanks. At least they sell it so. And what they also installed there, they have the formal casket, the hat of Adolf Hitler, in like presented there in the church. So I don't know in what capacity they present Adolf Hitler's casket there, as a sort of humiliation for Hitler, or what I believe is much more realistic, as a way to adore him as the inspirer of a great Russian Reich. The whole story is absolutely crazy, and I think for some people in Trump's administration, it would look like they would come there and say, "Oh, it looks great. It's like Mar-a-Lago estate, and we would love to reinstall it, like by somewhere like close to the capital."
This
I mean,
is
if you want to
insane.
imagine what it looks like, think Game of Thrones. I mean, it's Game of Thrones crossed with goodness knows what else, you know.
Yeah, I just showed this on the screen to our viewers. I'm also looking, for those mosaics with like Stalin. I think they have like a bunch of World War generals or whatever, and the craziest thing about them is that a bunch of them were actually eliminated by Stalin himself. But anyways,
And
it's
cannons, the glorification of weapons and violence is all over. And then there's a park, isn't there? Now, I haven't been there, and I'm not likely to go, probably in my lifetime. But there's a park just outside it, and there's cannons and all sorts of military paraphernalia making up the fixtures and fittings of it. It's an absolute obscenity, and there's no other word for it. But it's also curiously quite stylishly done. I mean, this is going to sound really rather weird to the audience. They've obviously used quite a talented architect, and they've used the best materials. But often, and when you look at the Reichstag thing, often when they do propaganda, they do it on the cheap, and it's really hideously tacky. I think the majority of their propaganda is really cheap and tacky, especially the internal one for the internal audiences.
Jonathan, what was the cringiest place that you visited in Russia that literally made your brain go boom?
Well, of course, it was the 90s, so there wasn't really any investment in propaganda of this sort. The state had pretty much kind of fallen apart, as it were. I do remember going into one of the main train stations. And they'd just done actually a very expensive refit. Because anyone's been to Moscow, there are some really large train stations in the center of town, and they were built in the early 20th century. And they're rather grand, rather spectacular architecture. You know, the train stations are little like cathedrals, and they're actually rather beautiful. So I was thinking, this is quite nicely renovated. And then I went to the bathroom, and I was expecting, I mean, my naivety, I was expecting a nice Western toilet that I could sit down on and, you know, just relieve myself in some degree of comfort. But no, they'd installed the little sort of squatty toilets with no doors, no doors and squatty toilets. So not only am I going to be, you know, straining like that, everyone can see it, but it was gold. It was literally a gold squatty toilet. And that, you know, that made an impression.
Jonathan, those who never been to Russia, they cannot imagine how it actually looks like when you go to, I don't know, let's say not Moscow, let's say a city like 20 kilometers from Moscow, like a cinema, for example. And you go to a cinema and it may look okay, all right. And then you go to the toilet when you see like a bunch of those squat spots with a bunch of guys sitting there, you know, smoking and talking to each other. That is the place where you usually like lose your iPhone 100%. Just to remind you, my friends, we are running the fundraiser for the 4th Operative Brigade. Check out the description, those who joined us a bit later. And one of the topics that I wanted to discuss today is the recent strike on Crimea, because according to the updates, several Russian bases were on fire yesterday and the day before yesterday, actually. We have information that Russian air bases Belbek, Kachanova, Fedorivka, and Gvardeyskaya were hit multiple times. There's already a bunch of footage from drones showing Russian air bases on fire, like video footage from drones, which is very interesting, by the way, because those are kind of long-range drones, right? And we also know that, according to what the Russians say, they already neutralized 170 UAVs, 14 Sea Drones, 3 Neptune missiles, 8 Storm Shadow missiles. They say that for the first time in 5 months, Ukraine actually used Storm Shadow missiles against Russians, but of course they don't say how many missiles and drones were not intercepted, and they also don't say which exactly objects, buildings, structures, and targets the Russians used to intercept those missiles, which they always do. Guys, how do you think, will we see a bunch of air defense vehicles this year on the Victory Parade in Moscow? Serhii, what do you think about it?
Well, that is a great question, and that resonates with a question from Angie Earthcarer from the chat, who says, "Hi guys from France, just a little question: how much popcorn should I prepare for 9th May?" And I would say, Angie, the more popcorn you want to enjoy, the more donations you need to make. So to say, I think that we need to divide several things here, to be serious. First, is the May 9th military parade in Moscow a legitimate target? Yes, it is. It is not a civilian action. There is a lot of military there, the political leadership of the aggressor country. And what is important, there is no chance that unrelated civilians can be hit there, because the whole center of Moscow is closed at that time, and only people who are proactively invited by the Kremlin come there. So it's quite different compared to all other events of such kind in other cities of Russia. I do not know if there will be an attempt to hit them. I think, why not? but of course Russians are also well prepared to defend their holy or unholy event. But we already have seen that some potential participants of this parade, like Vucic and Fico, they have announced that they will not visit it. They are suddenly ill. And the president of China has officially asked Ukraine not to hit that parade. I tell him, hey, guy, why don't you ask Russia not to hit Ukrainian cities every day? I am in Kiev now. Today in the morning, I woke again at 5 a.m. of the air raid alarm. There were a lot of Serhii drones flying in the airspace of Kiev. Why don't you, guy, call Vladimir and say, Vladimir, please, can you don't hit Ukrainian cities, killing civilians? Kharkiv, for example, today, when more than 10 civilians have been killed by Russian strikes. So it's all very hypocritical. But what is also important to say, I think that, and the Ukrainian intelligence also thinks so, they have released a report recently on that the Russians may organize some false flag attacks on civilians on May 9th in minor cities, minor towns across Russia. And if you can imagine, the provincial cities have always been an expendable meat for Moscow. The Russians have initiated several strikes of that kind in Volgodonsk, for example, in 1997, or in other cities, just to demonstrate the evil character of Chechen rebels and blaming Chechens for that. So I can easily imagine, and once again, the Ukrainian intelligence says it is quite realistic, that the Russians will try to achieve to organize some attacks in lesser towns on civilians and to achieve the number of civilian deaths, preferably children or someone like that, and then blame Ukrainians, saying, look, Ukrainians have no shame. They attack civilians on this holiday of victory against Nazism. That is why the world should accept Russia's strikes on Ukrainian cities. I think this danger can be very realistic. And the last thing from the commentary, Burning Third Rome says, I visited the park, that Russian World War II propaganda park, in 2006. It was a normal Soviet-style World War II museum. Well, Burning Third Rome, 2006 and 2019, or later, 2018, the park was finished. Quite different times. 2006, it was like a normal weird Soviet World War II museum. 2019 and after, it was already Putinist museum, which is much harder stuff, like really indoctrinated people into brainless soldiers. Everything you have seen from the Soviet style was stupid propaganda, and Putin's propaganda is not stupid anymore. It is very efficient, and we can see it like in later 80s. Nobody believed in Soviet propaganda. If you asked like children at high school, etc. But nowadays, people are completely brainwashed. Quite different level of brainwashing.
Yeah, and it's very good that you mentioned this thing with possible Russian provocation, because this is something that I also noticed literally yesterday. It was reported by the main directorate of Ukrainian intelligence. Why Ukraine doesn't target Russian civilians? Because it makes absolutely no sense. We have defined military targets that we're hitting. We have Russian oil refineries. We have Russian military factories that we are striking pretty often. Yesterday there was another strike. The day before yesterday there was another strike, and it makes absolutely no sense. Again, it's Russia that proved that Russians do commit atrocities, and basically they keep proving it again every week almost in Ukraine. Strike in Kryvyi Rih that took lives of 9 Ukrainian kids, and followed by strike in Sumy, strike in Kharkiv. Those were absolutely insane. But considering this, Jonathan, do you think that we can see the false flag attacks in Russian cities on 9th of May?
I mean, certainly it's entirely possible, and there is no moral barriers to doing it. I've recently talked to, if people aren't familiar with his work, a guy called Yuri Felshtinsky, and he's written books about how Putin's regime was sort of really entrenched and built the foundations of his popularity through what are thought to be sort of FSB orchestrated bombings of Moscow apartment buildings. If I'm not mistaken, around 300 people killed in those. And there's very credible evidence that the state was perfectly willing to massacre its own citizens in order to manipulate politics. So it's well within the bounds of imagination. They may conclude that because this has been called out and people will be looking out for it ahead of time, that actually, they might not be able to pull it off. They might not be able to get away with the optics of doing that. And we've seen, we see a lot of their, when we weren't paying attention during the long war, they would often, strike Ukraine with artillery strikes, and then they'd strike their own villages and their own lines and blame the Ukrainians for violating ceasefires and so on. So, one of my guests on the channel, who I think Serhii has been on with before, was an OSCE monitor, and he just said the scale of lying, and they were quite willing to sort of shell their own villages just for a propaganda piece. So entirely possible and entirely within their capabilities to do so. Whether it would give them any advantage at this point, that's probably the calculation they're making. Is there an advantage in public opinion? Is there any way they can leverage that to try and drive a wedge between Trump and Zelensky? Maybe we'll come on to this, because this is interesting. A lot of people are thinking that Trump's tone has changed. His tone might have changed towards Zelensky. You've got the minerals deal being signed. You've got a $50 million arms shipment. This isn't gifting, but this is selling arms to Ukraine. But that's fine, because there's money from the European Union and there's money from previous funds to buy these things. So you're seeing some interesting movements there, and people are immediately, as they do, trying to normalize the situation, say, "Oh, Trump's changed, blah blah blah. He's no longer a Putin puppet." And this, I think we need to be a little bit more cynical about that. But Putin may look at this and go, "Do you know what? We've got to nip this in the bud. We've got to do something to drive a wedge between these, and we've got to do something to make Ukraine look like the bad guy." So there are certainly strategic reasons why they might do this.
I absolutely agree with you. And speaking of Trump, oh my God, I don't want to speak about Trump, friends.
No.
But you have to, because he's an important factor in the equation.
He takes up all the oxygen, though, doesn't he? Sucks out all the oxygen, all the sanity from whatever space he's in.
He literally sucks life out of me. Seriously, every single time I hear about him, and I keep hearing about him like every single freaking day. But let's talk about our favorite person here, right? Media say that Trump is mad at Putin. We already mentioned it, Jonathan, and also Lindsey Graham prepares new sanctions, allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah.
Yeah, allegedly. Are you skeptical or optimistic about this? Let's start with Serhii.
Well, I'm not optimistic in the sense that I don't believe that there will come something very substantial from the White House. On other hand, I'm not pessimistic, because look, to be pessimist, you need to imagine that the situation can go to worse. And frankly speaking, there is not much room for the situation to get worse. Like, the only real bad way of the situation to develop is when Trump completely sides with Putin, starts providing Russia with military equipment, intelligence information, or else. And I don't think this will happen. Not like under the current conditions. Being optimistic, will he sanction Russia more massively than until now? I don't think so. There can be some minor sanction introduced. Will he supply Ukraine with arms? It can be the case. We have seen already that Trump announced the first the first deal between Ukraine and the United States, as Ukraine is purchasing American arms for money, and that is already a good start. But if I'm not mistaken, it's about like 15 million, which is not that much, like for the scale. So yes, it can come to some minor improvements. I don't think it can come to major problems, but the center of gravity in the support of Ukraine definitely goes to Europe nowadays, and that is good for everyone. First of all, it is European war. Russia threatens Europe first of all, and Russia sees itself in war against Europe. And it is in European vital interest to support Ukraine. Secondly, the United States, with Trump or without Trump, goes into I always have problem with this word, isolationistic direction, and they will try to be involved as last as possible in what they call European issues, because they have Taiwan, they have China, they have like South America, they have all other regions in the world where they believe their interests can be harmed much more than on the European theater. So the US will not continue to be a reliable main provider of security for Europe. So it's in our interest to forget about Trump or another US president and to invest into our own defense capacities. And I'm now in Kiev, and look, this country is a key asset for our security for the next couple of decades at least. This country is the only democratic country in the world which has experience of fighting modern war. Not the US, not other countries, Ukraine. Because none of the countries in the world, except of Ukraine, from the democratic camp, has ever, since the last 20 years or longer, fought a full-scale war with a million army involved on the front of 2,000 miles, suffering from deep strikes by ballistic missiles, cruise missiles on the whole territory of the country, and surviving it and fighting back. And that is actually what other countries have experienced last time during the World War II. And if you compare the scale of the war with the number of soldiers involved, it's maybe Vietnam War, Korean War. Not even the Desert Storm is comparable to that.
I can agree on that. And before I ask the same question, before I ask Jonathan the same question, oh my God, my English is so bad today. I want to mention Richard Don Quixote and Lisbeth, who mentioned the not Lisbeth, Marino 4691, who mentioned the Russian airplane that was shot down by Ukrainian Sea Drone. It's a fact because Ukrainian Sea Drones they were seen often armed with anti-air R-73 missiles. Those are, I believe, infrared-guided missiles that Ukrainian troops used to launch against Russian aircraft, and we know several cases when those missiles launched by the Sea Drones shot down Russian helicopters over the Black Sea. And here we can see the same situation, only this time it was, I believe, Russian, either MiG or Su aircraft. I will check out the details and I will tell you more. But Jonathan, switching to you, what do you think?
I mean, that's the first time in history, they say. It's the first time in history a seaborne drone has taken out a combat aircraft.
Yeah, and I really, really hope to see that back in 2022 when Russians were launching their missiles from their strategic aviation, from their Tu-95 bombers, Tu-22 bombers, and we basically could not do anything. And then all of a sudden, they started losing aircraft like A-50 Russian AWACS that was shot over the Azov Sea. Again, nobody knows the details, but I think we have several hints on that. And currently this stuff as well. However, I think if the Russian AWACS was shot down by naval drone, I think we would know about it as well, because
Yes.
this is for the first time in history. In Ukraine, a lot of things happen for the first time in history. Recently, for example, Ukrainian Brigade Khartia from the National Guard of Ukraine conducted first ever land operation using drones only. They used wheeled drones that literally attacked Russian positions and eliminated Russian personnel using RPGs, machine guns, and also there were drones used that deliver explosives and go off near their targets. So we can see that. I think this is something amazing. I made a video about it on UATV. You will see it tomorrow. So, Jonathan, finally, tell us about what you think about those updates about Trump being allegedly made at Putin and about Lindsey Graham allegedly preparing sanctions against Russia. Will we see this happening in the observable future, or my grandkids will find a job finally before it happens? What's your thoughts?
My thoughts here is we have to look at the long-term direction and what's happening in the short term. If in the short term we see some moves emerging to put pressure on Russia, if we see sanctions increasing, if we see a tightening of, let's say, the sort of sanctions regime against the Grey Fleet, well, that, for instance, is very much going to have to be in Europe's court. And we'll come to that in a minute because, of course, Europe hasn't cut itself off from Russian oil. So we're here getting mad at Trump. There is so much more that that Europe could do to cut off Russian LNG oil and sanction its own companies that are still working. We think of Raiffeisen Bank and Austria, who is still operating in the Russian market for the benefit of their employees. Well, we've heard that one before. So there are sins on both sides, just to say there. But if we see in the short term Trump aiding Ukraine, we need to remember he's not doing it for Ukraine. He does not give a rat's ass about Ukraine. I mean, he quite literally doesn't and never will. And actually, most people in his administration don't either. Rubio, probably indifferent, slightly hostile. Vance, incredibly hostile, pathologically hostile to Ukraine. And Trump clearly doesn't like Zelensky. For a whole variety of reasons. The main one, of course, being that Zelensky refused to be extorted by him to dish dirt on Biden. That's a whole other conversation. So we have to look at the optics of this. If Trump does anything, it'll be because there is domestic political pressure, because a majority of Americans support more action on Ukraine. I think the figure I saw was about 60%. Even in the Republican Party, it's just a small minority. About sort of 51% are more, let's say, well disposed towards Ukraine than are against it. And those who are against it very much fall into a propaganda bubble, which that's difficult to tackle, but maybe not impossible to tackle if more voices like Ben Shapiro and others speak out. So whatever we're seeing here, it's almost certainly for domestic political advantage. I expect that in the long term, we will see a return to the trends and patterns that I think are far more visible. When you parse the language, you look at the actions, you look at who's been appointed, what's actually happening. The long-term trend is to have, as you mentioned earlier, a kind of Witkoff-Lavrov pact, like a sort of, Molotov-Ribbentrop. The long-term trend is for the US to align with autocratic states, especially Russia, for economic advantage, but also to share techniques. What techniques are those? Techniques on how to build an authoritarian state, how to undermine the rule of law, how to push back against your components. I think they are to call it ideologically, aligned is, because we're not talking really about an ideology, but we are talking about a way of conducting politics, which is an anti-democratic way of conducting politics. In that sense, I think they will always tend towards trying to have a rapprochement with Russia. I think it's an annoyance to Trump that Putin is far more interested in his genocidal, pointless war than he is about making money. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding between Trump and Putin. They think that Putin at some level has some economic rationality and is driven by money. Of course, we know that that's not how the Russian power vertical works, and Putin has more money than God. And actually doesn't really care about that. How many stripper discos and mud rooms and whatever can one man consume, especially when his body is probably failing him. No, he's interested in his legacy, historic legacy as a great Russian Tsar, as a killer, as a thug, as a tyrant, as someone who's increased the territorial footprint of the Russian Empire. I think that is, at this point, that's what he cares about. Money is neither here nor there. So you've got a fundamental misalignment, I think, between goals. In the short term, that result in a little bit of pressure. Is Trump going to turn on Putin, as some people are saying? That's completely delusional. I'll stake. I will literally eat my hat. Fortunately, I don't have a hat. Baseball caps excluded. I will eat my non-existent hat if you see Trump properly turning on Putin. I do not think that will happen.
Yeah, and that is very, very unfortunate. Speaking of Tsar, recently I saw a video of when Putin invited journalists to his apartment, and of course you probably know this term, Ukrainian term, pshonka style. It's hard to explain. Anyways, it's like ridiculously.
It's a Mar-a-Lago style. You just say Mar-a-Lago style.
Yeah, Mar-a-Lago style, basically, in ridiculously rich golden toilets and shit like that. Interesting episode was that on the background there was a portrait of Tsar Alexander III, Russian Tsar, hanging in the apartment of Putin. And Alexander III, he's known for being anti-reformist, unlike his father Alexander II. He was anti-reformist. He's known for forceful and absolutely terrific Russification of the occupied territories and occupied people. So he's known for repressions against all kinds of national minorities that were back then occupied by the Russian Empire. Apparently, he imagines himself being like his follower or something. Well, at least we know what to think. We at least know what kind of idols he has, okay, because we know that he uses a lot of Adolf's propaganda tricks. We know that he uses a lot of technologies back from those years utilized by Germans, but now we know exactly who is his inspiration, where does his inspiration come from. You mentioned J.D. Vanov and Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio especially, because that dude got spoiled. Again, something I wanted to talk about, because J.D. Vanov, for example, recently acknowledged that Russia, in fact, invaded Ukraine. Thank you so much, J.D. Vanov. Not vice versa. For the first time, oh my God, they acknowledged that it's Russia invaded Ukraine, not vice versa. But at the same time, he blamed Ukraine that Ukrainian soldiers are dying. Oh my God. Why do people like United States Vice President keep making absolutely ridiculous statements? It's like, when you hear J.D. Vanov, you think, dude, why didn't you give up like Pearl Harbor back in those days? You could just say, dear Japanese, take it. We want to save our soldiers. And they would never attack, right? What kind of crap is in their heads? I have no idea. Serhii, maybe you know.
Well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. we are witnessing the level of, I would say, absolutely illogical hate towards Ukraine among a number of the MAGA movement supporters and leaders. And that scares on one side, because like these people, they not only ignore Ukrainian suffering, they visibly enjoy it, like seeing Ukrainians being like punished. And it scares, because you see, okay, why are these people so cruel and so aggressive towards a nation which has done nothing bad to them? In contrary, they find all possible excuses for Russia's behavior, while Russia openly says about its plans to destroy the United States, to destroy America, right? And then you think about, okay, what was a logical reason for anti-Semitism in Germany in 1930s? There was no economic or other logical reason for the Nazis to hate the Jews. Absolutely, not single one. There were, of course, like some minor profits they have gained from expropriation of Jews to make one Nazi boss or another richer by providing him with a confiscated Jewish supermarket store like the Hertie supermarket in Germany, or like by confiscating Jewish flats in Berlin when the Nazis have failed their well announced program of building apartments for the Germans, and they have found out they cannot build enough living apartments in Berlin. So they decide, okay, we confiscate it from the Jews, we kill the Jews, and we give these apartments to Aryan Germans, and we'll say, okay, we have fulfilled our promise. But these things were all so tactical, so small scale, and there was no single logical explanation to just hunt a large part of the population, well integrated, being patriots of Germany. Like a lot of Jews were officers in the Imperial Army, fought bravely in World War One. Sorry, decorated officers. There was even a movement of these veterans of World War One, Jews, in later 20s, early 30s, who tried to explain to other Germans, we are patriots as you are. We have fought for this country. We have spilled our blood for this country. Why do you hate us? But this hate was illogical. And they just wanted to kill the Jews. Full stop. So I don't say that it is the same feeling, but you don't need to find a logical reason for a hate. Sometimes hate is just hate. And sometimes hate comes out of a sort of understanding to someone else. And Trump clearly thinks that he understands Putin. And then he finds out that Putin hates Ukrainians. And then he says, okay, I hate Ukrainians too. And then other minions of Trump say, okay, our great leader hates Ukrainians. We will hate Ukrainians too. But I think that speaking about Putin and his view on Trump, I think Putin never respected Trump. I think Putin despises Trump. I think Putin finds Trump silly, arrogant, and easy to be manipulated. I think Putin enjoys every time when he meets someone from Trump's office and thinks he may play this person like a very simple musical instrument. And I think for Putin is a former KGB officer who clearly enjoyed his job and who came to the KGB, and he acknowledged it in his early interviews when he was giving interviews. He came to the KGB because he believed the KGB people have some special power. And this power was to manipulate people, to make people do what you want, even without them understanding it. So he came to the KGB to be able to manipulate people, to subjugate them, to enslave their consciousness, and to make them into your servants without they even notice that. And that is, I think, one of his great motivations. That is why he collects Western leaders like trophies. Like Trump collects wives, Putin collects Western leaders. Gerhard Schröder, Miss Kneisel from Austria, Mr. Fillon from France, Fico, Vucic, Orban, to a certain extent Scholz. And now he has the most precious trophy in the world, American president, the most powerful person in the world, the person who is being pictured in thousands, okay, hundreds of movies, fictional and non-fictional. If you have a US president in a movie, it is a person where all power lines of the whole world comes to him, concentrate on his person. And Vladimir Putin hangs ahead of this guy in his trophy room, and sipping his tea or his vodka or whatever he drinks, he can invite other people to his trophy room saying, and this guy, I have conquered him too. I think that is a very powerful kink for Putin. And I think Trump never understood it, that he is just a very special trophy of Vladimir Putin.
Sounds absolutely menacing. Before we continue, I would like to say hello to James from Why Ukraine. He's in the chat, or at least he was, so let us know, bro. And also, dear friends, I would like to remind you that we're running the fundraiser for the 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard Rubizh, my brigade from HOSTOMEL. Legendary guys, people I know personally, a brigade commander who was my company commander back in the days in 2016. Actually, it's so inspiring to see young commanders like him becoming brigade commanders. That is a completely new level, but they completely earned that. And guys, with your help, we already collected almost 40,000 euro for drones that will be saving lives of my guys, of my comrades, people, again, I know personally and root for and pray for every single day. Jonathan, switching to you, do you have anything to add to this? Because one thing that I wanted to ask you is that we can see a lot of basically mouthpieces like Marco Rubio currently speaking after Trump, whatever ridiculous thing he says. We can see JD Vance, who speaks ridiculous stuff about Ukraine by default, generally speaking. Is that dangerous? Can they create a new trend? Because again, majority of Americans currently support Ukraine. They won't be supporting Putin anyways, because Americans don't like what is going on in Russia. Americans don't like Russian lifestyle. They can laugh at gopniks, either like lying down dead after drinking vodka or dancing or whatever, beating each other up. They enjoy watching Russian videos about traffic accidents and things like that. But I don't really see Americans enjoying the idea of living in the same environment, because that is something that is killing, that is not worth, even considering. Do you think people like J.D. Vance, people actually in the top management, top speakers of the White House at this moment, do you think they can introduce a new trend when it comes to relations with Russia? Do you think that they can convince American population that Russia is not the enemy, which they often like to repeat over and over again, that they want dialogue, that it's time, to bury the hatchet and start talking, or it's literally impossible. Because the reason I'm asking this is because they were elected. They were elected by majority that doesn't support Putin. Can they change their mind?
To an extent, I think, there are currents of this already taking place. It's not theoretical. But also, this isn't a partisan thing. You had a reset with Russia under Gorbachev, and everyone promptly forgot almost, the historic behavior of Russian imperialism. It's like, yay, they're our friends now. And I think there's a natural inbuilt optimism. There's a natural willingness to sort of believe that things can change, believe in the idea of progress. Um, so I think it's kind of natural, perhaps people in the US, but also in the UK and other places, to believe that history can move on, and that countries can change and mindsets can change. And we saw this in the 90s. We saw it with the Obama reset. We've seen it with multiple resets of US administrations wanting fervently to believe that Russia is different, that Putin is different, and let's turn a new page. At the same time as Obama was trying to do his reset, Russian state television was pumping out vile racist jokes and hate towards him. And it was quite clear that they had nothing but contempt for him, that they thought they'd played him, that they thought he was an idiot. And of course, there are deep racist overtones to that as well. And you can see partly with Trump, there's a certain mockery there. There's a certain sense. I mean, every large nation that's had an empire has an element of exceptionalism, which can be extremely damaging. Britain has it, which partially led to Brexit. The US has it, and France has it. All large imperial nations have this exceptionalist mindset. The Russians have a particularly virulent version of it, to the point where they're not willing to learn from other people. Now, this isn't every individual Russian, but it's more of a general sort of broad-based trend. The belief that you have the solution and nobody else does, the belief that everyone else is idiots, despite all the visual evidence to the contrary. Ultimately they're idiots or naive, and we're the only smart ones. So even though they may be saying, Trump's our guy, Trump's our man, there's a degree of contempt beneath that as well. The idea that you've manipulated somebody powerful, somebody with authority, that somehow, you've got one up over them. It comes back to a phrase I learned, which I didn't really understand at first. And there's people are going to find this quite anecdotal, and like, what's that got to do with geopolitics? But I think it's quite important. You hear these kind of what are called poslovets, so these sort of little aphorisms or phrases that people use. The one that really got me was, I was going to go to the market and buy some meat or something to make kebabs or sheshliki or whatever. And I said, "Oh, I need to take some money. I need to take some money." And then, somebody turned to me and just said, "Dengami idora kupit," which is like, even an idiot can get something with money. And the implication here, because not everyone's going to get it, the implication is that cleverness comes from actually ripping somebody else off. You're smart if you steal it, if you get it for nothing and get away with it. And I think there's a deep sense there, not just of theft, but the idea of humiliating somebody else, getting one up over them. And I think that is ultimately how Putin almost certainly sort of views Trump as well. While you were talking as well, I just thought, Marco Rubio. I'm going to go to AI later, and I'm going to say, show me a picture of Marco Rubio and his dacha in Rubliovka, wearing some sort of, string vest and eating sardines out of a tin. I think I'm going to have fun with AI tonight, sort of imagining the Trump administration sitting on the veranda of their little rundown dachas. That could be amusing. Anyway, Yeah, I mean, random thoughts there, but I think ultimately, as you say earlier, they probably think they've collected various people, and actually they have to an extent. These narratives, and there are people who actually believe them. There are people who are taken in by them. You have Joe Rogan, you have Tucker Carlson, and a whole load of other people who, to a greater or lesser extent, either consciously or unconsciously, are spreading Russian propaganda, building a picture of reality that actually has nothing to do with the reality we exist in, or which actually exists out there, but it's the reality that Russians would want to plant in your head. It's happening, OS. It's happening. It's real, and many people are already taken in by it, and many people in the administration are influenced by that false picture of reality.
I agree on that. And what you explained about that case with even a stupid one can buy things with money, that is literally the projection, or I would say reflection of this whole culture of like Russian gopniks, the bullies that literally, I gotta explain this to the viewers. There's like Russian gopniks, okay? And we had that in Ukrainian culture as well, by the way. It disappeared in like early 2000s, but we also had that because it comes from the prison culture. When they surround you on the streets, they don't necessarily beat you up in order to take your phone and your sneakers. They start talking to you, and they start asking questions, and those questions are kind of cunning. They ask, do you have money? Do you want to share your money? Why don't you want to share your money with a respectable gentleman? And like, are you stupid? Are you like angry or what? Or are you the smartest? Самый умный, что ли? And this is how they do that. Of course, they look stupid, they look ridiculous, and they are basically freaking bullies, like a street mob. But at the same time, this is their culture, the culture to set up, the culture to steal, to snatch, because this is how you live the Russian way, which is absolutely ridiculous. I am so happy that Ukrainians got rid of that stuff, because that stuff, that influence that came to us from Russia, it was the foundation of Ukrainian corruption, the foundation of it. Ukrainian corruption that saw its highest peaks when Ukraine was ruled by pro-Russian governments, by people like former Ukrainian Minister of Defense Solomatin, who was literally carrying a logo of FSB on his jacket while he was a Minister of Defense of Ukraine. That is during Yanukovych. How freaking crazy is that? Oh my God. And Serhii, you talked about the situation with Jews during the First World War. I think I kind of understand the basis of that, the foundation, why they used Jews as a scapegoat, basically, because we can see the parallels in Russia, of course. Yes, in the beginning those were Chechens, then they were Ukrainians. In the United States, they also need a scapegoat. Of course, they have problems. They have problems with Russia waging its informational war. They have problems with China. They have problems with Russian hackers, North Korean hackers, Chinese hackers. They have a lot of problems of that kind. Southern border, yeah, kind of problem as well. Different gangs operating in American cities, coming from, for example, Latin countries, and trading drugs and things like that. Yeah, I can understand that. But what to do in order to gain more votes? Talk about Haitians eating your home pets, for example. Talk about drinking dirty water that turns you into transsexuals. I'm not kidding. That is literally RFK who said that absolutely ridiculous stuff. And RFK, by the way, introduces new like health project in United States, I don't even want to think about. I don't care. You know more about that, guys. So I think, of course, hate by itself, by the definition, is absolutely illogical. Hate towards people who live like either in the same country with you or across the border. But at the same time, when you need more votes and you dream of being rich and powerful and you have those ambitions, you need some kind of scapegoat to say that those Greek people are, to blame for all the problems we have, or like those people from South Korea, they are to blame for all the problems that we have. Our dogs are dying on the streets because of the South Korea, or those like Albanians. You create problem out of nothing, and of course, don't drink bad water because it will definitely turn you into a transsexual. One thing that impresses me all the time, and before we start talking about that, I would like, first of all, to thank the Night Dreamer, who just said, I have no respect for conspiracy theorists. My friend, I do respect you so much for saying that, 100%. And I would also like to remind you that we're running fundraiser for the 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard. Rubizh, Brigade Commander Sidorin, Colonel Sidorin. I cannot call this person a friend because it's against the subordination, but he was my commander back in the 1st Infantry Company. I remember him since he was a captain and extremely talented young officer, already in the high officer ranks, and I root for my brigade so much. Thank you, my dear friends, for supporting us. You can find all the necessary information in the chat. You can find the PayPal link, and also if you don't use PayPal, you can use your bank for direct transfers. There's also information. We are running this fundraiser with the help of Serhii and his European Resilience Initiative Center that is registered as a charity fund in Germany, and they are helping not only my brigade but also many Ukrainian military units. Serhii himself is right now in Kiev. And switching to our topic, we will talk about other updates, but this is something that I also wanted to ask you, my friends. We know a case when Elon Musk called AfD, for example, during the elections in Germany, or like briefly before the elections in Germany. Elon Musk had a call with AfD, that is far-right party in Germany that is now considered an extremist party. Finally. Then a couple of days ago, Donald Trump met Karol Nawrocki from the Polish party PiS, Porядok i Solidarność, as far as I remember. Again, showing his support to this man and to his movement, and this right-wing party became increasingly, I would say, antagonistic towards Ukraine and its leadership. Why the hell does the new administration just keep rooting for the wrong people? This is something I cannot understand because, we can see this switch in democracy like 180 degrees. The new president of United States, the new administration has absolutely opposite policies towards Ukraine comparing to what we saw last year, for example. At the same time, they just keep supporting wrong guys. Of course, we know that Trump has this absolutely enormous admiration of Putin. He has warm feelings towards the North Korean dictator, I'm sorry. Recently, he announced talks with Iran as well, despite writing stuff against Iran. But again, why the hell is this happening? Who do they work for? What is wrong with them? Why do they keep supporting the wrong people? Serhii, what's your opinion?
Well, first, one small correction. It's prawo I sprawiedliwość, right, or law and justice. The Polish party, and I would not call them like far right, like the AfD. I would say like far right in Poland is a Platforma Konstytucyjna, constitutional platform. But the pieces, they are, of course, they are much more traditionalist compared to German conservatives, for example. But anyway, it is an interesting phenomenon of Trump trying, or Trump's team trying to set connections to those far right groups in Europe, like Alternative for Germany, or the others, as I think they believe that these people can be natural allies for Trump. Like they are also anti-establishment, as Trump is, or as he sells his policy, and they see the common ground for bringing for legitimizing their policies, like anti-immigration, anti what they call wokeness, and you could see that in the speech of J.D. Vance in Munich during the Munich Security Conference, when he said that practically the United States administration is the protector of the free speech, and here in Germany, free speech is under attack. And that is what we see now when Mr. Rubio published a tweet saying that not banning but identifying of Alternative for Germany as an extremist party is an attack on opposition. And then it led to a Twitter conflict between him and the German foreign ministry, when the German foreign ministry said, no, it's not anti-democracy. It's how we deal with the threat of far-right extremism gaining more support, etc. And it's more complicated, I think, than it looks to be. As I'm not a fan of proclaiming or identifying Alternative for Germany as an extremist party now. This should have been done decades ago. Like now, Alternative for Germany has over 20% of support, and in some regions over 30% of support. If you say that now you start to deal with this party, legally, yes, I can gladly accept the fact that, or easily accept the fact that the Germany's service for protection of constitution, which is practically a part of the law enforcement agencies in Germany, that they had enough reason to say we can, because of like the questioning A, B, C, D, 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 we have checked it and we have like 20 reasons out of 30 to say the AfD is far right or extremist, and we put it on the list, etc. Okay, it can be true. But what political consequence does it have? People vote for AfD in that scale, yes, partly because they are racists and far-right people, or partly because they just don't care, because they don't find their hopes being fulfilled by other parties. Look at all the Trump supporters who voted for Trump, and then 1 month after, 2 months after, they posted videos saying, oh, now I voted for Trump, but now Trump's tariffs ruin my business, or Trump has deported my husband, or Trump does that and that, I didn't vote for that. Why did they vote for Trump? Mostly because of frustration. Mostly because they believe that Joe Biden's administration doesn't do their job. And they didn't care about consequences. They just wanted to show a stinky finger to Joe Biden, who they believed acts against their interests. And then Trump said, I will punish them. And they voted for Trump, and now they got screwed up. So I think with Alternative for Germany is the same story. You cannot beat that kind of populism by just putting it on the list of extremist organizations or banned organizations or something else. And with all due my respect to criticism on G.D. Vance's appearance in Munich, and he was rightfully criticized for not having called Vladimir Putin and Russia and Kremlin as a threat to Europe, but calling like some wokeness policy as a threat for Europe. It's stupid. But with all due my respect to that criticism, they didn't see the cause. The cause of this all happening is that neither Europe nor like democratic establishment in the US found answers to the most crucial challenges of the last 2 decades. One of these challenges is Russia's aggression, but not only that. We see that many people just do not see their voices being heard. And then social media amplify their frustration. And then they find the most aggressive and the most aggressive group, which they think is being hated by the what they call establishment, and therefore they believe this group will stay on their side because they also hate what they call establishment. And after that, they get screwed up. And it's exactly like we have seen it in the 30s in Germany, when those people who voted for the Nazis, they found themselves like a couple of years later being ripped off by the Nazis, sent to the front to die. So the situation, I think, is much more complicated. The real answer to the rise of far-right populists would be creating a system, a state system, where you can go to police and if you think your rights got violated, and you get a decision in a court within like a couple of months, not like 2-3 years like we have in Germany, and getting things done, not being not having feeling that you vote for any party for 16 years and you get Angela Merkel as your chancellor, whoever you vote for, because she will also always find a coalition with the Social Democrats, and I think we will still have the consequences of this problem. Like for 3 years, Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany, kept saying we must stay with Ukraine as long as it takes. For 3 years, the war went further and further, and Scholz was afraid of providing Ukraine with all military support, including Taurus missiles. And all these 3 years, Russia was supporting the IFD with narratives, with all the things, Alternative for Germany. And now, like 4 years after Scholz's government, the AFD has grown up from 10% support to 25% support. And now they say, okay, we just proclaim AFD as an extremist party because it is legally possible, and that will solve the problem. No, it will not. No, it will not. The only solution is when Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor of Germany, the Chancellor who will be proclaimed, I think, on the 6th of May, when he makes steps which people who vote for AFD out of their ignorance and lack of understanding of consequence, when they will see that their fears have been heard, their hopes can be fulfilled with the new chancellor, so then they will vote for the CDU, not for the AFD. But it's much more complicated than say, okay, our voters are stupid, they vote for Trump or for AFD. Yes, they can be stupid, but they are still voters. And they have a power to install you a president like Donald Trump or a chancellor like Alice Weidel in Germany.
I completely agree with you, my friend. You know, First of all, it reminds me the story that happened in Ukraine when Yanukovych was elected. 100% people were playing with democracy far too far. But on the other hand, I never blame voters. I never blame the people myself, because as a communication specialist, I know the technologies involved during the election processes, right? And I also never blame people for being disappointed in their politicians. So when two things combine, when you are disappointed with somebody that literally doesn't give you as much as they promise, that don't fulfill your expectations, of course you will vote for a different party. And those guys armed with political technologies that, again, you know a lot about elections, how they're being done, and especially when they armed with Russian experience, then I am not blaming the voters at all. But this is a clear sign of vulnerability in the society itself, when you don't have enough political elites that are powerful enough, that are strong or experienced or motivated enough. Because when we talk about, for example, people like AfD, they never have plan B. They have only one plan: to win, whatever it takes. Other guys, they always have this plan B, what to do in case we lose, and yada yada. Probably they don't have enough of this, fighting spirit, or they don't understand the responsibility, the weight of responsibility that they have on their shoulders, because you are going to rule the country, you are going to manage the people, the state, you are going to build the future of this country. And this is something so frustrating. We've seen that a lot in Ukraine during Yanukovych times, and people generally, again, voted because they were basically lied to, and they didn't care much. They didn't understand, again, the weight of their responsibility as voters. But again, nothing that I want to blame them for. Jonathan, what do you think about this? I know that you have a lot of ideas. First of all, why does the administration of the world's leading economy root for the wrong guys all the time? Do we see this shift in, I don't even know how to say it, the philosophy that prevailed in the United States for many decades? Strong collective West, strong collective security, fighting for freedom and things like that. Do we see the shift in this paradigm, or maybe it's something else?
I do blame voters. I'm going to completely say the opposite of what you just said there. There is, in our complex societies, I think, an onus on everybody who reaps the benefits of a democratic system to at least put some energy into educating themselves. That is not to say that everyone will come to the same conclusion. That's not to say that everyone will vote for the same party. But if you're spouting or repeating some weaponized nonsense, and you haven't done any due diligence to go out and check whether what you are repeating and amplifying and believing in has some foundation in fact, I think you can and should blame people for that. If you put your feelings ahead of any kind of rational thought process, which unfortunately most voters most of the time do, then I think you can blame somebody for not putting in the time and effort to challenge their own preconceptions. Now, this is obviously very sort of high-minded. People say, well, yeah, that's not how the world works. That's not how people think. Unfortunately, we're living in a society which is increasingly technological. The benefits, the tools, the power of the tools we hold, just even this little guy here, is a power that even 20 years ago would have been, 30 years ago would have been absolutely undreamt of. Say undreamt of. If you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams, he envisaged a little device in your hand with all of the knowledge in the universe. So some people were sort of imagining these things could exist. I don't think he would have thought that we'd have had these things just a couple of decades after he wrote that. And he may have envisaged it, but I think very few people who invented this internet thing envisaged that when they unleashed this almost infinite tide of information, and now with the AI, the ability to generate information at a scale never before imagined. Of course, most people, and especially the founders of the internet, would have thought that that is going to lead to a new age of civilization. But actually, it doesn't. Information is an insight. Information isn't fact. Information isn't sanity. In fact, quite the reverse. You're just building a bigger and bigger and bigger haystack. So it becomes more problematic to try and find the needle in that haystack. With the electorates that we've got that are very much driven by personal beliefs, personal prejudices, driven by personal feelings, combined with this little guy, if people don't, expend a lot more of their time in getting educated, if a lot more threshold of people don't understand, for instance, what the scientific methodology is, if they don't inject the ability of self-doubt and to critique their own points of view, we are completely screwed. We are so absolutely and fundamentally screwed because the bad guys, the disingenuous people, the people who are willing to spin lies to manipulate behavior, manipulate the system to gain wealth, manipulate the system as, in Russia, a mixture of resources and the sort of pathology you see there. Unfortunately, lies are far easier and less costly to propagate than an attempt to establish some kind of truthful narrative. I think Yuval Harari talks about this very eloquently. There's a reason why there's a lot of novels and there are very few, much fewer histories. If you want to write a history of the Roman Empire, you've got to put a huge amount of investment of work into that. If you want to write a novel, well, you make something you can make up. You don't need to put as much effort into that. Unfortunately, this disparity between the ability to craft lies and to craft something that tries to attest towards something that is truthful, the disparity in resources to create these is so disparate and so huge that unless we have, I would say, a mass movement of people to really steep themselves in understanding what democracy is, what resilience is, what disinformation is, and how it works, then we're lost, quite simply.
I totally, yeah.
Yeah, I could also add that what Jonathan said, I agree with your assessment of the situation. What I wanted to add is that the Western way of acting for the last couple of decades, maybe longer, was dictated by or influenced to a large extent by a false feeling of guaranteed security. Like, I can do whatever I want, I stay safe. Because the Western way of life seemed to be unshutterable, unbreakable, invulnerable. We can elect any government we want. In the worst case, we will have some political crisis. We will elect them again. We will re-elect them. We will change them. My pensions are secure. My payment is secure. I have my contract at a company, which makes me secure. Nobody will attack us. We can do whatever we want. And that behaves like all sorts of people's behavior, like the Brexit voting. What can happen bad? Like, okay, we will be outside of the EU, but it will be the same, just outside of the EU. We can ignore the war, we can ignore the aggression, we can ignore Russia's threats because Putin will not dare to attack NATO. Who told you so? Why do you think he will not dare? Like we are now trying to find like 60,000 troops as peacekeeping mission for Ukraine in Europe, and we cannot find them in the whole Europe. We cannot find 60,000 soldiers additionally who can be sent to Ukraine for a peacekeeping mission. Ukraine has almost 1 million people army, including fighting units, including logistics units, including units in the rear part of the country. 1 million. Europe cannot find 60,000 troops. That is the consequence of the mindset. Whatever I do, I will be safe. That is why European politicians and German politicians, first of all, we're saying all the time, we will not do anything to arm Ukraine because this will increase the risks. So in their mind, not being involved into this war will continue keeping them safe, because not doing anything is safer than doing something. That is totally logic of a bureaucrat who knows that inaction is a safe way, but action is potentially dangerous. And I
It's
think
the
many
same as the
voters.
assets, Sergey. I mean, you should mention the central bank Russian assets here, because again, what you speak to here, the managerial mindset, the mindset of the economist, the pen pusher, the bean counter, and the bureaucrat, those are the people that are preventing the 300 billion in Russian central bank assets from being handed over to safeguard Ukraine and safeguard Europe. The risk we're running now is because it's safer to do nothing in their minds, or not even safer because it's easier. It's just easier and less risk to them personally, to their careers, to not do anything. We risk these 300 billion being passed back to Russia. Well, game over.
Yes,
Russia could buy a lot of
absolutely.
weapons with $300 billion.
Absolutely, and that is what many people say for absolutely right. This money should be confiscated. Not they're frozen now, but they will continue to be frozen until June. And in
June,
June
only
there should
June.
be voting, end of June, and there will be voting again, and it should be done anonymously and to prolong it for the next like 6 months. And if you don't do it, the money is unfrozen. And then what the Russian central bank does, it pulls this money back. And
And who has a
people say,
veto? Guess
yeah,
who has a
absolutely,
veto over this? Hungary, Viktor
absolutely,
Orban, and Fico in Slovakia.
absolutely. And many people like in Europe say, oh, why can we confiscate it? Because Russia can sue us for that later. Dude, you can be nuked by Russia any day, and you are afraid of Russia suing you? In what world do we live?
Well, they want to protect the integrity of the euro. And here my question is, what happens when the Baltics are subsumed into the Russian Empire? I believe at least one of them, if not more, actually has the euro as a currency, and I may be mistaken in that. But yeah, goodbye to your precious euro if part of your economic region is falls under the Kremlin's orbit. Goodbye to all of that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Here, Andrew in the chat said that it's not like Europe cannot find troops. It's just politicians are scared. And, as a
No, they
Ukrainian,
can't.
because
He's right. They can't find them. There aren't enough that are trained up. There isn't enough equipment for them all. I'm not sure they can get the numbers together. Maybe Sweden and Finland, if they fully mobilise them. But Western Europe has wound its armies down to such an extent they physically cannot get the number of people who are properly trained up to that level. It's not just politicians obfuscating. They now realise the scale of the problem. Their commanders have told them, don't overpromise. Starmer was taken to one side and said, yeah, this thing about this security deterrence force, yeah, we don't have that. So you might want to walk that promise back a little bit. It's a real problem here.
Yeah. As a Ukrainian, in Ukraine, we always don't, my God, We don't recognize authorities, right? It's like national Ukrainian feature. We never recognize authorities. We never recognize bosses, politicians, presidents, like whatever. Even now, yes, we support President Zelensky, but generally and naturally, Ukrainians never recognize authorities above them because Ukraine is naturally land of anarchy. Nestor Makhno is like our god and stuff like that. So I always blame politicians. If you want to blame somebody, blame freaking politicians because they don't do their job well. And it's always like that, literally. It's always like that, wherever you go. So on that note, guys, there is one more update and we will wrap up in approximately 10 minutes. The update that I wanted to talk about was attack on Sternenko, the assassination attempt. Serhii Sternenko is probably the most famous person in Ukraine right now. He is an activist and he's a volunteer providing thousands of drones on a daily basis to Ukrainian military units. And there was an assassination attempt committed several days ago against Sternenko when an assassin that worked on FSB, allegedly without knowing that, because that lady who tried to shoot him actually thought that she was texting with an SBU, with a guy from Security Service of Ukraine, which I don't really believe because she said that she didn't know who Sternenko was, while everyone in Ukraine knows who Sternenko is. So his life was saved, but this very attack is very interesting because, you know, several years ago during the handover of the cars that were delivered by sniffing brigade, by NAFO 69 to Ukrainian military, I talked to the guys, I talked to Ragnar, for example, and asked, aren't you afraid of Russia striking your office? And he was like, well, if they wanted, they would strike us already. And still there are many other volunteers, like, for example, Serhii Sternenko. And boom, several years later, we can see this assassination attempt. I want just to briefly ask you, what does this assassination attempt tell to you personally? What does it indicate to you? Let's start with Serhii.
Well, the Russians made no secret of this of their wish to kill people who are involved in production of drones in Ukraine, and Serhii Sternenko is one of the most efficient persons on this area. He raises a lot of money for the drones. He pushes personally amazing initiatives like anti-air, like air defense drones, etc. And it was, I think, December last year when top Russian politicians, including leaders of parliamentary factions, publicly said that those who are involved in provision of drones in Ukraine need to be assassinated. That is understandable. Like drones bring now like 70% of destruction of Russian equipment on the front. Not artillery shells, not ATGMs, not missile strikes, but drones, 70%. And of course, Russians want to stop it. One of the most efficient way to do that is targeting those who raise donations for the drones of any purpose. And that's why donate for Sternenko's campaign. Don't forget to donate for our Rubizh campaign, and practically donate to any drone campaign of the organization you trust, because Russians will hate it. And I think that Sternenko case is actually very interesting, because Sternenko, it was not the first attempt to kill Sternenko. I think it is at least third attempt. And the first attempts were done by pro-Russian forces in Odessa, as he was a very young local activist in Odessa, pro-Ukrainian, and he was nearly killed by an attacker on the street. And then, in his self-defense, he killed the killer, or unsuccessful killer, and then he was arrested and he was prosecuted by a pro-Russian prosecutor back then. And the whole trial was a crystal in which we could see how Ukrainian society forms around an activist. Back then, activist. Now, I would not call him an activist. He is now one of opinion leaders, one of very important persons in Ukraine's self-defense war. But back then, a lot of people, including myself, demanded release of Sternenko, and he won the trial. He was proclaimed by the court as innocent. The court has proven that he was acting in self-defense. And now the Russians try to kill him again. I'm afraid it's not the last attempt to do it by the Russians, but that is the reality in which all people in Ukraine who are exposed publicly and who do something what harms the Russians live in. Still, like, I'm by far, like, by light years not that important as Sternenko, but even me, I get death threats in Berlin, mostly, and I feel in Kiev actually safer than in Berlin. But of course, Sternenko and those people like him, they're much more exposed here to any danger. And the Russians hunt people of that scale here very openly with their agents. But I need to say, Sternenko has a very nice humor. He said before he was nearly assassinated, the Ukrainian intelligence services killed a Russian general lieutenant in Moscow, and Starsky, we have done a live stream dedicated to that case. And then Sternenko tweeted from the hospital that, yeah, my friends called me and said, as a revenge for my failed assassination attempt, they will kill another Russian general in Moscow. I say, yeah, that is exactly what Ukraine does. While the Russians kill Ukrainians here or try to kill them, those people who fight their fully legitimate defense wars, the Ukrainians surgically hit legitimate military targets in Russia. And that's what makes Ukraine so special.
Thank you so much. We have several commentaries, by the way. One commentary from Night Dreamer was that a Russian that attempted the assassination, it was a Ukrainian woman from Odessa. And according to her lawyer, she texted to this man who actually was an FSB agent, and she believed that he was from the security service of Ukraine, and she kind of fell in love with him on the phone. So he convinced her to assassinate Sternenko, which again, I don't really believe that we can trust it much. Then we have a commentary from another user, Ukraine/NATO is losing big time. Fact is, 2022, Russia controlled 28% of Ukrainian territory. As of 2025, Russia controls 19% of Ukrainian territory. Literally, dude, like, learn stuff. And we have another commentary from Sarah. I'm wondering if Starsky has received any death threats also. I tell you this, my friend, in 2022, in like February, March, April, I think I would win an award for the most death threats received by Ukrainian bloggers from Russians, I swear, because the day I posted that video from Kyiv, actually, my address to the Russian soldiers, I received probably tens of thousands of death threats, and they were in the commentaries to my video. I think they're still there. But switching to Jonathan, we don't have much time. I know that we got to wrap up very soon, but what do you think about this assassination attempt? Are Russians desperate, or they are just being Russians?
It's the latter, and I think it's a question, this is going to sound very surgical and cold, it's a question of strategic input versus resources. If Putin had infinite resources and was pretty sure there was no cost, then he'd have all his opponents killed tomorrow. That doesn't matter whether they're ethnic Russian, in the country, out of the country, or not. He'd make them all disappear, a bit like the guy in the Marvel movie with a click of his fingers. They'd all be gone. And if he could have it done in all sorts of vile ways, then he'd have that done as well. But the fact is, there's an economic calculation here. Who are the greatest opponents of the regime? And these aren't even necessarily people that get under their skin, that they irritate them. It's who is a direct threat, not just to the war effort, but it's to their business model. That's how we have to think about it. And if we turn back to some of the sort of famous hits in the past, someone like Skripal, yeah, they're taken out because, or attempted to, because they come from that sort of KGB background. So there's a question there of disloyalty, but also they're working with foreign intelligence services, allegedly, which again is a direct threat to Russia's mafia business model. If you harm them and prevent them from earning or stealing money, they're not going to like that. It's the same with Litvinenko. Yes, he opposed the regime. Yes, he had books and stuff about the apartment bombings. That wasn't really what got them upset. One, you were one of us, right? So that's a direct betrayal. Two, you are threatening our business model. You're examining, the mechanics of the mafia, and you were sharing that information with, the security services of a foreign power. At this point in time, of course, anyone who supports Ukraine is essentially affecting the Russian mafia business model, because Ukraine itself is in the direct path of that. Ukraine is, one of them materially and ideologically is a key target for this future glorious Russian Empire. Even within that, they can't attack everybody who irritates them. So they look at people who are directly having an impact. And this loops back to what Serhii said earlier. Those who are not just critics, but who are aiding the war effort, who are generating drones, who are volunteering on the ground. Yeah, when you do the calculations, these guys are at far greater risk than those who pen articles and, touch wood, do the stuff that I do. Because you're directly interfering with their plans. Think of them as a Bond villain. The sort of Mr. Bond thing. Do you want me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I want you to die. Well, that's the psychology of this whole thing. You've got in my way. And if you're just there as a buzzing little fly or an irritant, yeah, you're nobody or nothing. You're not worth expending resources on. At least that's the comforting story I tell myself.
I don't want to talk, I want to eat, and I want to see people in the chat eating as well. And by the way, Sternenko does a lot of great things by providing drones to the Ukrainian military, and so do we with our fundraiser that you can find all the necessary information in the description to this video. There is PayPal link, there is also an instruction, a handbook for a direct bank transfer to help raise funds for Ukrainian drones that will help to save life of soldiers of the 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard, Rubizh, my brigade, where I served since 2016 until 2024, oh my God. So, my dear friends, thank you so much for being with me. Jonathan and Serhii. I will call you Serhii. I cannot call you Sergei. I'm very, very sorry.
Thank you. It's absolutely, it makes me absolutely happy. And please do it further.
I'm happy to. You speak Ukrainian better than me, actually. And also big thanks to Jonathan from Silicon Curtain for joining us today. It was absolute pleasure seeing you. I hope that we will have many more such meetings. Dear friends, thank you so much for supporting my brigade. This is very important to me to make sure that my guys are safe, and your help to raise money for those drones that we're trying to provide our brigade with through European Resilience Initiative Center, they will save lives of my guys. Unfortunately, quite a few of them already passed away, and your help literally helps those guys see their relatives when they have vacation, when they return from the deployment. It's a very, very important thing to do. Thank you so much for supporting my brigade. It's a right cause. And as always, big thanks to all the moderators in the chat for providing us security guarantees for the Operator Starsky channel. I appreciate it. And also big thanks to all the beautiful people in the chat. Big thanks to everybody who asked their questions. Thank you for your commentaries, and big thanks to all the members of this channel who help to keep it running. I also appreciate it big time. Thank you so much, my dear friends. We'll see you next time. And as always, be safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.